Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Britton Heller. I teach international law, human rights, and tech policy at Stanford University. And thank you very much to the Filecoin Foundation for having me here today to speak about a topic that I hope we all enjoy. Today, we are going to talk about the fundamentals of building trust, integrating integrity into the tech stack. So we have three speakers today who are going to talk about how each one of their projects is doing this in a different way. First, we're going to have Nathan Freitas. Perfect. Yeah. Of the Guardian, director of the Guardian project. Next, we'll have Nikhil. Oh, sorry. Next, we'll have Brewster.
No. You can switch.
Oh, there we go.
Nikhil.
Nikhil Raghuvira, who is the co-founder and CEO of Atheos. And finally, after a little musical chairs, we'll have Brewster Call, the founder and digital librarian of the Internet Archive. I'd like to start today by asking them to introduce themselves, as these are three people who are building the future web where you can trust what you see. So each one of these people has a project that focuses around authenticity, provenance, and the preservation of web content. And they're doing it in very different ways. So Nathan, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience with a specific use case that the Guardian project is working on?
Sure. I think I can best express that in the name of the grant proposal that I wrote to Filecoin Foundation 3 years ago. It was a really exciting moment, but as always, I couldn't help myself but come up with sort of a cheeky name. And it's Decentralized Veracity and Distribution, but the acronym is DVD. But the veracity piece is key here. The idea that everything that we were thinking of doing in this work was built on some sort of verifiable truth or something that you could trust ultimately. And so the work that we focused on is two parts, so I'll focus on half of it today. One is, as Marta said before, capturing audio-visual evidence with smartphones as part of evidence gathering, as part of documenting news stories, as part of documenting the state of the planet. Anything that you think is worth having provenance and authentication built into it. And when we started this work, there was no standards really yet for how to do it. We actually began this work 10 years ago, working in collaboration with Witness, of how do you do digital signatures and how do you store this in a long-term way such that others later can come back to your photo or video and make sure it wasn't tampered with or somehow corrupted. The other half of our work is around distribution of content and things like app stores in a decentralized way. So not only are we thinking about the functionality that people need to build trust, but how they actually get the code and software and receive that content in our work. So those are the two areas that I'd like to talk more about today.
Nikhil, same question.
Yep. So hey, I'm Nikhil, co-founder and CEO of Atheos. What we're building is a decentralized policy engine, and in the blockchain world as well. So fundamentally what we're doing is saying, blockchains are based around smart contracts. So how do you embed policies into your actual smart contract in a pre-transaction manner? And what really that means is, hey, you're building a smart contract or you have an application. How do you determine the types of transactions that come in, the types of assets that come in, the types of assets that go out? As you add more and more structures into smart contracts, as blockchains are used more, you're adding more complexity. So how do you abstract that complexity? So one example to make that more concrete is let's take an exploit or a hack that's happened in blockchain world. How can an application say, hey, we actually don't want to accept assets that have been involved in an exploit, one that's embedded within your technology stack itself? So right now, that's actually really quite challenging to do because it involves bringing on-chain information. You have to look at the history of the blockchain. You have to think about off-chain data, such as someone who's saying, data sources that are saying, hey, these are addresses that have been involved in an exploit. These are the addresses that actually stole funds. And so from there, you're merging all different types of data. And then how do you bring that to bear in a way such that when a single transaction is coming into that smart contract, that transaction is blocked before it happens? That's basically what we're building. The decentralized component here, though, is how do you do this in a decentralized and trust minimized way? How do you ensure that it's a system that can be governed by an ecosystem rather than any one individual, as well as how do you ensure that if you're integrating something into a blockchain, you're not reliant on any one individual to do that check, but rather one that is trust minimized. And so I'll pause here, but that's essentially what we're building.
And Brewster.
Decentralization. I'm going to define it as no central points of control. Right? And I think that's actually a pretty good definition, and it works, and it's all around good. Trust, fuck if I know. And I will guarantee if you have a dinner conversation with anybody of just like, let's talk about what that means. It's gotten so far wrong that we have conversations about trust minimization or trustless system that we're trying to achieve not trusting. It's like, what? Okay, so anyway, so I think that's kind of, so may I suggest out of this, try to remember the word trust and use it in a question mark context in the next couple of days, and I think you'll have fun. Okay, so a story that as you're listening to my story in the rainy sense of story, think about what is needed for trust, not trustless, whatever, in through this story. It's actually a good case of the Internet Archive. I run a library called the Internet Archive, started a bunch of years ago. And there was a CNN lead piece yesterday, was about a lawyer for the previous president lying under oath. And this lawyer basically said that they did not use Twitter. They had not used Twitter, and under oath, and they said, even with a surrogate, fake account, nope, didn't do that. Turns out, yep, Chesbrough did, and it's scathing. And it's basically, there was a account, and it aligned with his personal outings and his personal positions, and so they know that it was this guy. He did this, and the reason why they know this is because the Internet Archive has an archive of all of those Twitter tweets, right? So we had preemptively gone over years, gone and recorded all of these tweets from this particular account, and it was able to hold to account this particular individual and prove that this guy had lied under oath. So I wrote to Mark Graham, who runs the Wayback Machine. It's like, I sure hope there is a accountability for somebody lying under oath about a very important topic. And he wrote back with a link to an old Saturday Night Live skit saying, it ain't gonna happen. Okay, so provenance, trust, right? We were trusted, I guess, with having a Twitter archive. We did this sort of thing. But can we trust the judiciary to actually hold somebody accountable for lying to them? Well, in some cases, it seems they go nuts on it, but other cases, not so much. So what does this word trust mean? Then how do we go and make something like the Internet Archive more decentralized? And that's where Filecoin has been coming in. We've now put a petabyte into the Filecoin network, which we're pretty happy about. Yeah. And we're looking to just pump more and also sort of make this whole decentralization work technically. But how do we then build the rest of the stack to be trustable, which involves people and organizations and institutions doing their fricking job?
You're here.
Yeah, I think that deserves a clap. Thank you, Brewster. And thank you for your service.
Thanks.
So, as a professor, I'm really interested in simple explanations. So I'm going to ask each of you a two-part question. Can you explain to me, like I was a 12-year-old child, the technical way that your organization's effort works, and also kind of a one-sentence simple explanation in plain language?
I have a 12-year-old child, so I practice this a lot.
Mine is 2, so I could give you a lot of cookies, but it wouldn't really help.
So I have one sentence?
One sentence to describe in one simple sentence, layman's language, what do you do? And then a simple technical explanation of how it works.
One, if you want to prove something exists today, you have to go down the street to this person called the notary public who will look at it and put a stamp on it and say, yep, it exists. And instead, we move that to something that anyone can easily use on the internet to prove that something exists at a time and place. So we help, that was hard. Let me try one more time. We make it easier for people to prove that a photo or video existed at a certain time and place when it was captured.
So how do you do that technically?
Okay, so technically, this is where the tech stack portion of our title comes in. So historically, you might have what was called a LAMP stack, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP for doing websites. In the decentralized web, you have a much different stack of services like Filecoin for storing things. But you also have this, here's one really cool service that I'll just focus on called Open Timestamps. It's been around for a while. It's based on the Bitcoin blockchain. And what it does is it injects little pieces of extra data into the Bitcoin ledger that is basically not a money transaction, it's like a proof transaction. So you're able to say, take your photo, run it through this thing that adds this tiny little, in a digest of like Marta was talking about, content IDs, that adds it to that globally copied ledger of Bitcoin, of the Bitcoin blockchain that says, yep, this set of bytes existed at this time, and here's the place where later anyone can look it up. So by having a global ledger as part of our tech stack, we go from one web server in one place holding the copy to the entire Bitcoin blockchain having that fingerprint of that. And so that helps us because we don't have to be the one sole source of trust.
Nikhil, since you deal with contracts, I wanted to ask you a question about ambiguity. How do we deal with ambiguity in the rules when we are creating blockchain-oriented solutions?
When you say rules,
I guess the rules we're talking about, legal rules, because you're trying to create basically a smart contract-based system. How do you deal with legal ambiguity when you're creating a technical solution for authenticity?
Yep. Okay. Cool. And I can also do the 12-year-old pitch. We basically, bad person tries to send you money or tries to send you something, you say no. It's basically what we do. The ambiguity part is a really interesting one because all of this is ambiguous, right? Any type of transaction one has, it is an expression of values at the end of the day and not only in blockchain world, in normal payment world. If I'm going to lend money to someone in my family, that is a value expression, is really what that is. And I'm making a determination of, am I comfortable expressing that value or not? Or if I'm receiving money from some type of yield, and that yield comes from some type of action that is bad for the environment, that's a value expression on my end, that I'm accepting money from something that has some climate degradation. So when it comes to these kinds of legal aspects, so it really, what we've had to think about in the way we're building it is, you actually give that expression to the developer, to the ecosystem. And this depends on what part of the world that they're in. We don't see kind of one uniform value because from a legal standpoint, you might be a project based on the United States and you have to adhere to US OFAC, FinCEN, US Treasury, DOJ. But if you're in Argentina, you're actually probably not going to care about the US Department of Justice. You're going to care about something completely different. And so that ambiguity really comes down to then, what is your risk tolerance? What are you precisely doing? Where are you located? And that full universe of what are those specific policies you want in place? And then from there, how do you have a deterministic model such that you have something, as you were saying, on trust? It's how do you make sure that that is actually executed, that there is no one else who's responsible for that execution who can say, oh, actually, we didn't execute that policy. But how do you create a forcing mechanism in which that policy is actually executed? And that's really how we deal with the ambiguity.
That's great. Brewster, 12-year-old question.
Let's build a library in the digital world that delivers the same way, or hopefully even better, than what we had in the physical world.
Follow-up question. What do you think are the two hardest problems that you have running the Internet Archive and associating it with blockchain? What is the hardest technical problem and the hardest ethical problem?
Actually, technically, it's just not that freaking hard. Okay, but really, it's just not that hard. And I don't know if ethical is the right way. It's institutional.
Okay.
What's going on is the real puzzle. But I think we've got a prototype in what the internet, a library in the internet era can look like. And now it's our Carnegie moment to spread it out. So the decentralization that was really successful was the internet, Vint Cerf, going and building this thing that you could just plug into by playing the rules. You could make the internet grow, and it grew across international lines and all sorts of things. Great. Maybe we've got kind of a way of making this thing but centralized, but now we need to make it decentralized for all the right reasons. So in the old days, it used to be that publishers sold things like to people or to libraries, and they had copies. And when the publishers go away, because they always do, or they stop printing it out or whatever, the libraries still have it. How can we make that come true? And decentralization is key to that. So that's why we've been investing in putting things into Filecoin and other things towards building a decentralized web, going and investing in the decentralized community and trying to help it happen with decentralized web camp. Please come this summer. It's really a good time of people that are trying to make a better internet. So how can we go and work together when we don't have sort of VC gasoline poured on us all to go and kind of make something happen in silos? How do we make something come together and work? So I think we have some things that we've learned at the Internet Archive and others towards making useful, essential services. Now we need to make them decentralized. And Filecoin is a good part of this. I went to the launch party of Blue Sky. They just hit 5 million users. That's also kind of from our community here, which is kind of cool. And let's see if we can decentralize Twitter and let X have fewer letters in its name. Can we make decentralization really work? That's, I'd say, our biggest tech challenge at the moment. And this is a great gathering to help make progress on that.
Can I jump in really
Please.
quick or build on that, which is, the leadership of the archive for so many years in this, and now moving into these, bridging what you have in your physical storage to these decentralized protocol is a direct inspiration to our work in teaching other communities how to, if they have 20 people with their own computers and decent internet connections, how they build their own virtual library storage network between those systems, or how a human rights organization might want to recreate that without, having all of the resources that you've been able to put in. So I think this is that time to, you are spreading the model because we've been directly influenced by what you've done. So
this is a follow-up question that's kind of self-interested. What my work does is focus on how emerging technologies work in an ecosystem and how you can't focus on one aspect of it in lieu of the other, or you miss the bigger picture. So how do we not create regulatory holes when we're looking at the integration of blockchain with the traditional flat screen internet, with spatial computing, and with other sorts of new hardware components that are going to create the next iteration of the internet? My question for the three of you is, how does your project, organization, or effort work together with the other two?
And our whole mission has been to be part of a toolkit, and we build little libraries, little apps. We build on top of APIs like the storage API provided by the archive, IPFS. So we are really the anti-super app model for sure, but we also collaborate, as Danny mentioned, at the human layer, the cultural layer, with groups like Open Archive and their decentralized archivists, with Starling and their people on the ground in Ukraine documenting war crimes who are actually telling us, does it work or not? So I think that picture of that whole human stack, and we love being part of that and plugging in different pieces. And then also, and I really encourage everyone here to find where you are on that stack and plug in your own small way, as opposed to defining, thinking you understand the whole problem and you're going to build a siloed solution to address it.
I really like that analogy with the human stack being an integral component to the technical stack.
Yeah, and our collaboration with Sam and the team at Witness for 10 years has been really invested in that, where it's just taken that long to figure some of this stuff out.
Nikhil.
So we see blockchains as mass coordination tools, right? For people, for communities, for creating networks. And if you're going to have a mass coordination tool that involves all aspects of society, it's how do you actually provide the tooling to be able to represent that, to be able to act upon it. So when we look at kind of what are policies, we're building a policy engine, but what is a policy? A policy could really be, there is of course this legal component. There is projects that have to think about how are they operating within certain legal jurisdictions. That's one. But then of course, as you look at kind of political action across different countries, what does that mean in terms of the policies you might want to put in place? But then it goes beyond that, because again, policy is again driven by people, right? And what are the decisions that they're making? So right now, when we historically think of policymaking, that's generally we think of, the automatic thing we attribute that to is a political entity, right, that's elected potentially. But really for blockchain technology, if you think of it from the standpoint of mass coordination tools, it's actually the ability of you're not only reliant on a government entity when you think about something like a transaction, when you think about the spread of information, what type of data are you using? And so for us, it is creating the infrastructure in which you can leverage any type of data that is coming from any type of data provider, but you can choose that. So from an AI standpoint, you have different groups that are using AI to be able to pull different data sources. That's relevant. How are you creating the structures in which you have community alignment by people for different use cases? So it could be a community currency saying, we want to limit the use of this community currency within a specific geography and not for anyone else, only for certain use cases. Those are all the types of kind of human components there. So for us, you start with blockchain as a mass coordination tool. If you start with that, that means that literally everything that affects society can actually be incorporated in the way that we interact on a blockchain.
I take your question as how do we explore, when the environment keeps changing, how do we leverage each other? How are we working together? Build prototypes, try things out, dive in, right? AI is the new thing, right? Or, blockchain was the last new thing. Maybe it's the current thing. Anyway, whatever. But there are these new things. Incorporate them, right? Try them out. Put them to test. Build prototypes before you start pontificating on how everybody else should do things. Keep a guiding light in process. For us, I find that having a .org at the end of my email address is just one of the best things ever. Because .org being nonprofit means that we don't do NDAs. We don't go and lead with, well, how much are you going to pay? We just try to answer yes, and that builds community and builds other people's projects and helps them out in ways that their project may not work. But if you went through this long rigor of trying to get an investment cycle or whatever, it's like it would be too hard. So just try things and get things built up. And it builds community that is wonderful to want to hang out with and get out of bed and continue to participate with. So that's how I think we've tried to work together, is just say yes. No NDAs.
Like that. It's very anathema to some of the lawyers in the room.
I was thinking.
So my last question for you is kind of a freebie. Meaning, what do you wish that I'd asked you today that I haven't? Like, what is important for the people in this room to take away that we haven't covered in our discussion yet?
I'll address, on the cultural and the human front, the impact we're hoping to have in the world, obviously. The other day when OpenAI launched the Sora video thing, it's rare that I have these moments where I get a sort of weird stomach feeling when I see some tech launch. It's like, whatever. But that really, when I saw, some of the images were fine, but when I saw they had, it was a video from the gold rush of California. I grew up in Sacramento. I grew up near Sutter's Fort. My family's 8th generation Californian. There is no dolly cam drone footage of Sacramento during the gold rush. But if you just saw that video on the archive or somewhere, you would think it was real. And there's a researcher we've been talking to about this idea of we're getting closer and closer to this moment when anything can be forged, and if we don't sort of timestamp and add provenance to the stuff of the past, you won't be able to tell the difference. A sort of jackpot moment from a William Gibson reference of AI being able to just rewrite history in some ways. And so I am trying to urgently, in small ways through war crime documentation support and elections and all the things we do with journalists, but in a big way, this kind of looming moment, just help people capture the things they care about in the world in a way that the future will trust it, you know. Is it our app or not? I don't really care. Is it some of the standards that are happening? I don't know how it's going to happen, but again, through prototyping and collaboration, like this is a big problem, and it just feels more urgent than ever. So I'm glad to have all your support. So.
I'm going to jump in with mine. I started off my career in technology and human rights, working on genocide and war crimes prosecutions and on atrocities prevention work. And so with the blockchain movement, I've been really heartened by the ability to basically add a seatbelt to suspenders and a helmet, where this is the first time that I would feel comfortable introducing that type of media-based evidence into courts. And that is an important and marked change. So the thing that I want to underscore for my contribution is that when we look at the benefit of this type of technology, the impact of decentralization and the impact it has on real people's lives is just that. It's real. And I don't want any of us to forget it.
I think I think the big question would be just why decentralization in the first place? And you hinted at it actually really, or you actually touched on it, is why even have something decentralized? What's really the value? What are the different reasons for that? A big aspect of course is ownership, ensuring that there's ownership over it for essentially in perpetuity, or how can you ensure that to stay? The other one is accessibility. The other one is being able to build on top of it. But I think the other real question is why decentralization? And because we're saying that, all of us here are saying that decentralization is better than something that is centralized, right? But it's in making sure that we know exactly why that happens, because that is a real core value. That's one of the core value propositions. Otherwise, the crypto is primarily known otherwise for illicit finance and Ponzi kind of casino money, right? But that's the wrong narrative at the end of the day. It's actually the underlying technology has real value from a decentralization standpoint.
Brewster, last minute.
Okay. Can we help you preserve something on Filecoin or beyond? And to give Marta, so I just heard from Nova Spivak that the first part of the archive landed on the moon last week. So it's like, yeah. So that's kind of cool. So can we help you preserve something would be, and Filecoin is dedicated to try to make that happen. I'm going to squeeze one more in. The lesson out of COVID for me was be essential, right? Whenever they separate off, you're essential, you're not essential, you know which side of the line you want to be on. It's like, be essential. If we've got this potential deadline of DWeb Camp in August, what can we do together to have something demonstratable mid-August that tries to achieve be essential? What can we do together? What can we pop? Because we don't have killer apps yet, really. Kinda, but not really, right? So what are some things that we can do to be essential in the really short term using some of the tools and techniques that are in this room?
Be essential, be impactful, be human. Thank you to our panelists, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.